Okay, first, so for those of you that skipped the last tutorial and went ahead and did the right side yourself, one thing to just mention is that was mentioned in the tutorial was when setting up this twist distribution, we set the values to negative 0.5 and negative 0.5 on Y and Z, just because the orientation of those joints is in the opposite direction. So if you had any trouble where that when rotating in Y it was rotating the opposite direction, you just need to know that you need to set up a negative value so it just flips the values over. And also, if these joints aren't rotating properly, it's because the IK, always remember to switch the IK blend to 0 so we can actually rotate those joints. And just to finish off the last tutorial, one thing we need to do again is we need to parent that control, parent constraint that control. So we'll just go to the outliner, we'll get this control, so we'll select the curve, so the driver, select the driven, which is the rotate offset group, go to constraint and parent. So now we're working on both sides, and you can see here that because we mirrored those controls over, we're now getting the same, so the opposite rotation on those arms. And depending on what you're rigging, I've experienced both ways where you just make the controls manually on both sides, so as you rotate these together they go the same way, so this right arm would be actually over here, so it's rotating the opposite way. But I found in some cases this is more useful, because if you ever copy the animation from left to right, so especially for like walk cycles, if you just want to copy the rotations of these joints over, it's going to be the same negative 80 on the both left and right side. So that way you can save a bit of time there, so you can see these are both rotating in the opposite direction, but it's mirroring it across. So it's up to you on that point. And one thing to mention, because we did flip it, the rotate Y of this you can see has been flipped, but that's not really a problem for the FK controls, because we're not actually going to move the FK controls. These are only ever going to be rotated. If we actually wanted to move these joints, or try and move these, they have no connections to the joints, so they're not going to do anything. So later on we'll probably just lock these up. Okay, so in this tutorial what we're going to do now is set up an IK FK switch. So basically, as we're rotating these joints, everything's working how we expect, but we want to be able to switch back to FK. And you can see here by just selecting the IK control, so switch back to IK, sorry. So if we select the IK control, and on the IK blend, if I select the attribute, and in the viewport if I middle mouse click and drag, I can track through that attribute, so switch it between 0 and 1. And you can see here that we can now just start to blend between IK and FK. So this is the way that we're actually going to switch FK off and switch IK on. Now there's a bit of snapping in there that we can try solve. So what we're going to do here is I'll just reset these back to 0. So we've got this all lined up, and what I'm actually going to do before I start to add in this IK and FK is we need some sort of a control where we want the IK FK attribute to be. So it's completely up to you where you want this. You could have it on the wrist control. Some rigs usually have like a little control above the shoulder that says IK FK, and they'll usually have that, so you can select it and it's got to switch between the two. I usually prefer to have it on the actual global control on this character, so that way on the global control I've got the IK and FK for all the different spines and all the different joints in this rig. So it just depends which way you want to do it. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by making a NURBS circle on this grid, and actually we'll start with a linear curve, and I'll just hide the character. And in the top view, all I'm going to do is, and again these curves are always aesthetic, so you just want to look aesthetically pleasing, so you could just use normal curves, a circular curve, but it might not describe, or it might not look like what it's trying to control. So in here I'm just going to turn on grid snap and just start snapping out a few points. So I'm going to start in the middle, or one off from the middle diagonally, move up 3 and create this arrow shape, move down and move up 3 and create another arrow shape. So just by making this control, and if you ever click a wrong point, so here I've moved up 2 instead of 3, I can just hit backspace to go back to the previous point and continue on. So by making it look more interesting, the animator can instantly see that this looks like some sort of global control for the character to globally move them. So it's just good to make control curves look like they're doing something. And we can add things, so I might add a snub circle to this just to make it look a bit more pleasing. And again, this is just purely to look like a global control, so the animator knows what they're dealing with. So on this, I'm just going to go freeze history, freeze transformations. I don't need to center the pivot on these objects, although I might need to on the curve because it doesn't look like it's in the center. And if it's not aligning to the center, I know I made so it looks like this actually isn't in the center. So I'm going to just snap that to the center. So I'm just wanting these 2 points to be in the center because at the start we got the bulk of this character in the origin, so we knew from the start we want to rig so eventually the global control is going to be in the origin sort of space. So I'm just going to make these controls in the origin, and all I'm going to do is select this circle, shift select the custom curve I made and hit P, and select him again, history, freeze transformations, and with this circle control I'm just going to go to the attribute editor, component display, object display, drawing overrides, enable overrides, and just switch that to templated. And once it's templated, it means we cannot select it anymore. So I've just left that in there to visually distinguish it from other controls. And another thing we can do here is, so I'm just going to scale this up to take the bulk of that character, so you can see that that's an okay size for these transformations. So now we can see just by looking at this control that that's obviously going to be the global control, the main control for the main movement of this character. But at the moment they're all blue, so it's pretty much nondescript at the moment, so we can't really distinguish what these are controlling. So one way to do this, if we select this wrist control, go to the attribute editor, and undo object display, drawing overrides, enable overrides, and at the bottom you can see a colour attribute. So we can actually drag along here and change the colour. Now there's some colours you don't want to choose, like if we drag along here, it should be like a purple colour. So this purple colour here, you generally don't want to choose this because you can see the purple is objects that are influenced by something. So this wrist is influencing the IK, so you can see the IK is purple, the joints are purple. So having a purple control is just going to confuse the hell out of us because we're going to be thinking that we've got something selected. And the same with some of these green colours, because when you select an object it turns green. So having that green colour is going to be confusing because it's going to look like we've constantly got it selected. So it's best to keep to colours that are used a lot in Maya. Now what I tend to do is for the left side of the control keep that blue, and then for the right keep it red. So you can just think left blue, right red, and that just means when the animator's animating, this left pull vector might actually be on the right hand side, but because they can see it's blue, they can instantly tell it's for the left hand side. So in here I'm just going to pick a light blue, and I'm going to make sure it's not the same blue as the default blue, and then just do the same with these. Enable overrides and switch to this blue colour. Enable overrides, switch to the blue, and keep going through. And on these I chose the wrong blue, so just make sure we've got the right one. And again, you can choose whatever colour you want, but it's a good idea to keep consistent with other rigs out there. I've seen a lot of rigs that use left is blue and right is red, so that means it's not moving. Yeah. So it's good to keep consistent with other rigs out there, because other animators who've been using other rigs, if they start to use my rig, they'll instantly recognise that left is still blue, so it's sort of a consistent thing. And then over on the other side, I'll turn these to this sort of crimson red. Oops. Okay, so again, for the global control I'm going to do the same, but for this I'm going to turn it yellow. And for my rigs, the general sort of colour coding is left blue, right red. Yellow is any type of global or control that has an effect on the entire rig or an entire section of the rig. And then things like red can be the upper body, and things like green or another colour can generally be the lower body. So it's just a way of differentiating those sections of the rig. So we've added this global control, and I don't really want to add the IK and FK switches on this curve here, because what's going to be happening is this curve is going to be translating and rotating for the main animation of the character, so I want to keep as little attributes on here as possible. So what I'm actually going to do is go to create and text, and in here, so if I just reset the settings, the text tool basically creates text in Maya, so I can create IK/FK, and you can choose a format. So tend to like impact, that's quite good, but you can obviously choose whatever text you want in there, choose a different size, but size doesn't really matter too much because we can just scale it up in Maya. And then we can choose different options, but for this I'm just going to keep it as curve and hit apply and close. And what we've got here is we have the text in a curve form, IK/FK, but if you look in the outliner, it's made a group, and then it's made a group for each character. So all I'm going to do here is move this up out into the front of the scene, just drag a marquee selection over everything, hit Shift P to unparent, click history, delete history and freeze transformations. And when I'm clicking this delete history, just remember it's deleting construction history on selected objects. So that'd be edit, delete by type, not delete all. And then now we can just select these groups and delete them because we don't need them anymore. So now we've got these curves here all on their own, and it's going to be a bit tricky having all these curves individual, because if we are switching between IK and FK, we don't want to have to work out every time which control we have to select. So in the next tutorial we're just going to go through how we can make these curves all one curve, and then how we're going to hook them up to the arms so we can switch between IK and FK smoothly.